Dennis Tubergen here with another video blog update. Thanks for watching. I was reading an article this past week from Daily News Live, and I have it in front of me here. It says that Zimbabwe is remaining in deflation. And I read the article, and I'll share a bit with you here momentarily, but what I thought about was a quote from Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson said that if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the very banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the children of the very country their fathers conquered. Well, Jefferson was a really smart guy, economically speaking, and Jefferson knew that when you let private banks control the issue of your currency, the tendency will be over time that they'll create too much. And you'll have inflation, or in the case of Zimbabwe, even hyperinflation. But typically, when you have a lot of money printed, it also creates a lot of debt. And debt leads to deflation. So you can have inflation to the point that it destroys a currency, but then deflation has to kick in. Now, let me give you just a bit from the article and make this point a little bit more clear. The article says the World Bank says Zimbabwe will remain in deflation this year due to low aggregate demand in the country. Well, of course, that's what a journalist would write. In its World Economic Outlook report released yesterday, the Bretton Woods Institute noted that the country will record negative inflation this year. Like Britain, Japan, the United States, and other nations dealing with the consequences of weak demand and cheap oil, Zimbabwe has been menaced more by the prospect of falling prices since March of 2014. So in other words, they've been in deflation for a couple of years. Market watchers believe the country, once gripped by the madness of hyperinflation that reached a peak of 231 million% in 2008, could wallop in deflation for the coming 2 years as demand shrinks and cash-strapped companies lay off staff or stop paying wages. Zimbabwe quit printing the local currency in 2009 after it had been rendered worthless by hyperinflation and moved to a hard currency regime dominated by the greenback, or the US dollar. Now, this brings up a very interesting point. When there's too much debt, deflation is the only outcome. It's the inevitable outcome. See, over 95% of today's currency today, or money, is debt. And when debt can't be paid, that means money disappears from the financial system. And when central banks print money to try to alleviate the symptoms of deflation, which are ugly, some of the symptoms of deflation are stock markets crashing, real estate markets crashing, high unemployment, just to name a few. Deflation is very, very ugly. But when central banks print money, and the Zimbabwean central bank printed money to the point that they destroyed a currency. And even when you're printing all this money, the debt doesn't go away. The debt's still there, and you still have to deal with the debt. Well, what happened in Zimbabwe? It's the same thing that happened in Weimar Germany after World War I. They printed a lot of money, they destroyed the mark, they replaced it with a rented mark, and the debt was still there, staring them in the face, and deflation set in. That's exactly what just happened in Zimbabwe over the last decade. They printed the money, they destroyed the Zimbabwean dollar. In fact, they printed a $100 trillion bill. The Zimbabwean currency was declared to be worthless. They started using the US dollar, and now deflation is staring them in the face because the debt is still there. Printing money does not solve a debt problem. Here's the lesson. In the United States today, there's too much debt to possibly be paid. Forget about government debt for a minute. Private sector debt is higher now than it was at the beginning of the Great Depression by 50% when you measure it as a percentage of the U.S. economy. We are on the same path in the United States as Zimbabwe. We're just not as far down the road. We have another advantage in that the US dollar is still the world reserve currency, but there is worldwide a shift away from the US dollar. It's occurring quickly, and in my view, you'll need to protect yourself. You need to take actions to make sure that when deflation kicks in, you're protected, and should the Central Bank of the United States, like the Zimbabwean Central Bank, continue to print currency, protect yourself there. as well. I'll be back with another video blog at some point in the next couple days.